At first, welcome to my talk. It's about the best practices to develop different layouts for the different device classifications. My name is Hassan Hoskel. I'm a developer at ImmobilienScout, and since 3 years, I think, I'm doing the Android development lead. I was the first developer in the mobile area at ImmobilienScout. I'm also a co-organizer of the GGG Berlin Android, which is a user group in Berlin which handles the whole stuff around Android. We have connections to Google, and we made monthly meetups where everybody is free to come and can join and listen and give talks there as well. You can find me on GitHub, on Twitter with Dev, and more I post on Google Plus with my name, Hassan Hoskel. Now, let's at first look at the devices. As you see in this image, is I think about 2 years old. There are so many devices in the Android area. And nowadays, I looked last week into the Play Store, we have more than 3,600 devices which we can serve with our application. There's one minor thing in the Google Play Store, there are only the devices listed which are accepted by the Google Play Store. So a lot of Chinese devices, tablets, are not listed there. So you can think about 5,000 to 6,000 devices which you can support with one application. And here starts the work for us, the developers. But at first, let's talk about the classifications. The main classification, you can say, there are telephones, phones, the smartphones, and the tablets. But we can make it more finer, granular. For example, small phones, normal phones, the 7-inch tablets, and the 10-inch tablets. But you can also say there are more tablets, like the phablets, so-called, the Note 2, for example, or Note 3. They are between a phone and a tablet. You can serve the best experience for the user for all these devices. There are also larger ones, like 2 years ago, Google pronounced the Google TV. In Europe, they have no really spreading. But in South Korea, for example, all broadcasters using Google TV as their receiver. So if you want to aim for South Korea, for example, you should offer an application which runs on Google TV. And last year, for example, there's another device classification, the car from Ford. They offered an SDK where you can create an application which connects to the board computer of this car. So you can send sounds there, you can use the voice commands which the user can talk in the car, and responds with an application which you have written there. They said this year they also extended this SDK so you can use more of the abilities of this car. And the most important thing is this SDK says, for example, if you are having a phone, for example, you can call someone. You are not allowed to use the touchpad during this whole if it drives, and you can use only the voice commands. So you can say, call my wife, for example, and he calls automatically your wife. And we see a lot of accessories running Android. One is, for example, Google Glass. Google Glass is a really nice accessory. It's small, it's beautiful for someone. There are some privacy issues, but that's another point. But for example, the Google Glass, there are some minor issues. For example, if you wear it, you feel a heat at the ear because it's getting hot because of the battery and the phone and the whole stuff inside. If you, for example, make an hangout with Google Glass, it's really ugly at that point, especially if you talk a lot, more than 10 or 15 minutes, it gets really hot at the ear. And they have no earphones because the earphone is in the plug you have in the ear, and this go to the bones to your ear inside. So you have no real plugs for your ear. Another device is watches. For example, that's a smartwatch 2 from Sony. That's their 3rd generation device for watches. The previous versions were really ugly, for example. They have no battery life. Every 1 or 2 days you have to plug it into the power. It crashes always your telephone because the Bluetooth stack was not really well implemented. But hopefully with the new version it will become better. And they also offer the Bluetooth low energy standard with Android 4.3. And here starts the hard work for the developers. Let us first look at the basics of the resources. We have resource folders, and you can use several qualifiers for the folders, for serving the best matching resource for the user. There are some qualifiers. That's not the whole list of the qualifiers which you can use. There are much more, like docking station, for example, or if it's day or night. And that's, like I said, the main ones. At first, you have the language. You can use the region, but there's a pitfall in the region. If you want to use the region, you must also use the language. Then the smallest width. That comes with Honeycomb Major Release 2. This is platform version v13. So we can say if the smallest width of the screen is 600 density independent pixel. If somebody don't know what the density independent pixel is? Okay, wonderful. Then previously to Honeycomb, you could use the small, normal, large as a qualifier. Also the screen orientation, the pixel density is most used for images, and the platform version also for images or something similar. And the whole system behind the resources is that the best matching resource wins. That means if you have different qualifiers and depending on the device configuration, they look at the qualifiers and look how many matches the device configuration. The highest number of the matching wins. And the previous slide, like here, shows the ranking of the whole qualifiers which you can use if you have the same number of matching qualifiers. So, for example, you have what can I say is Zoom, for example, and you possibly think you will get automatically the SV600DP, but that's wrong. You get the large one because this qualifier smallest width was only introduced in Honeycomb version 2, was level 13. And now I think the other thing is the image user. I think you all know it. You can use different qualifiers for the density for the images. If you are forced to use language as well in the image, you should use also the language and region. But a better approach is to use 9 patches. They stretch automatically. You can define where the background image should scale automatically and where the content is, which you insert into the whole thing, especially in a button. And if you want to serve different launcher icons depending on the OS version, because in different OS versions they have different guidelines for creating a launcher icon. So we can serve as well different launcher icons. At first, then we should proceed with the real topic of now, how we can proceed with layouts. My opinion is to start with that one. It's the default ones. You can serve the smaller phones. You can say smallest with 320 density independent pixel for the other phones, then 600 dp for the 7-inch tablets, and 720 density independent pixel for the larger ones. This classification only works after major release 2 of Honeycomb, with this platform version 13. And it's fairly easy to use, I think. But if you make it a little more complex, if you also want to support devices lower than Honeycomb, you have to use this classification. So you can say the default one are the phones, which are pre-Honeycomb or pre-version 13. Then V11 for the tablets, and the rest is like the slide before. And a small hint for the qualifier smallest width, the packager of Android automatically adds a v13 to the whole resource name in its APK, so it doesn't get any problems regarding the best matching number of qualifiers. And how we can classify the whole thing in code? We have 2 different possibilities here. The first one is to read the whole configuration of this device through the get configuration of the resources. Or the other one is to use Boolean resources, which I think is much smarter because you can define different resources. Like here, for example, the default ones. You can have to define at first a bool add node. Then you give it a name, like phone small, and the other classification which you want for your application. And then you just give the the Boolean value, true or false, if it respects your qualification. And this one you can put in all these different, not the layout folders, but in the values folders, so you can read them automatically through the code. And that's fairly easy. You just say get resources, get Boolean, and read the whole the flag of your configuration. And even the compiler helps you. You can't write something wrong because it's the pre-compiled R file generated, which you immediately see. And now we created different layout files. For example, the main for the main activity, and we have different folders for that. We see one for the default one, which serves automatically, if not a special qualifier reaches the best matching number of qualifiers. And now we have 6 different main XMLs. Well, if you have, there comes a little problem. If you want to fix one bug in the 10-inch layout, you have to do it in 2 different files. At first, in the V11, can we see it? No, it's not really. The V11, and then also the smallest with 720 density-independent pixels. That's really error-prone. So how to avoid this? You have the possibility which comes through the SDK, which named as resource aliasing. With resource aliasing, you can reference to another resource. You can know it already through the strings, through booleans, integers, and even layouts. One thing is resource aliasing doesn't work for menus. And now how to use the resource aliasing? At first, you put all your different classification layouts into the main folder, give it a name what you want, and then you have the possibility to define a resource node with an item. You give it a name which you want to use in the activity or during the inflating. Another important thing is you give a type that should be layout, because you want to reference the layout, and then you just say I reference my layout through the resource aliasing stuff. And now I show a little bit of code how it looks like. It's 1 second. Here, you can see we have the 4 main screens which we defined, and then you see if you take the default layouts, for example, you see we have the main and say that's the phone others. As well, if you take for the smallest with 600 density-independent pixels, you see that's the 7-inch tablet area. So you can define on your own which layout should be served to the user. This is really a small variation of the whole thing. You can extend it even for portrait and landscape if you want to serve different layouts for if it's the device used in the portrait mode or in the landscape mode. That's really a mess. You have to define a lot of different things there, but the experience for the user which you gain, it's much better than without doing anything like that. Now a little scenario. You get 2 different wireframes from a designer or from your project manager. And how you should proceed now. As a developer, you normally see at first the same in both screens. The first one you see is the footer. In both areas, the footer is the same. So how you can go forward with it? You know it's the same. You don't want to declare in every layout file the same thing. Well, that's fairly easy. You can use includes. And to use includes, you just go to the area where you want to use this include, give it the node include, and reference the layout which you want to use. Here's the footer. And let's look again to the code, how we can use it. And here's the footer. It's just a text view, but you can extend it how you can want. And in the layout file, we just include the whole thing in the end. There's a minor pitfall at that. You can change the layout, the ID of this main layout element in the include, but you can't set any other attributes to it. So we can't say the third field of this include should have another name. But there we have a solution in 1 minute for the whole thing. Now we use includes for the footer, and we see here, for example, that's more or less always the same structure. We have a label and a description. The main difference in both wireframes is that the first one is the orientation is horizontal, vertically, and the second one is vertically. So that you can't use for that an include. So you can create a custom view for that. And to create a custom view, you just extend, for example, in this case, in linear layout, and set the orientation depending of the Boolean resource which you created previously for your device classifications. You can also create a custom drawing layout or something else. It depends on you what your use case is. And now we defined also the layouts for the small areas there. We can reproduce that and can say just put it in and then we see it all thing. But if we have a lot of business logic in that custom view, and or you need the life cycle, or you want to use loaders, and you want to encapsulate the whole stuff in one custom view, you should use the fragments. So you can reuse everything, but don't use them too heavily. For example, for this little approach, using fragments is a little bit overloaded. Use custom views, but if you, like I said, if you have a lot of business logic there, use fragments. And to see also the whole stuff in the layout preview editor, you can use XML attributes, and you can also add through the whole thing the attributes to your view. That means, for example, we want to change the label and description immediately in the first layout file. You just set your custom attribute and say the label should be label 1 and the value should be label 2, and in the next line you can change it for another view. Therefore, you just have to declare stylable in your resource folder, give it a name, which you want to use later in the code again to find it. Then you define an attribute, give it a name, and now you can define a format. Format is, like all resources in Android, you can say string, integer, drawables, layouts, as well as the reference. So you can use the references and not to make the hard-coded string, for example, in your layout file. The other thing is you can also define custom enums for you, which you can use in whole your application. And how to use that in your layout file? Well, there you just have to add a custom namespace. You can name it how you want, but you have to use it later on in your layout file. And you must set at the end a res author. That's really important because if you use also libraries with custom attributes, so you don't have to define for every attribute an own namespace. You just say res author and it automatically scans everything. And that's also an advice by the developers of Android Studio and Gradle. They say just use res author as the namespace, so it gets automatically handled by the whole system. And with that, we can use it in the view. We just say app label, app for our namespace, then we say the attribute and put our value in that. Here we set it just as hard-coded, but as I said, you can also use a reference. And how you can use it in code? Well, we have our custom view. We just use the normal custom as the constructor, but the important thing is you must have the attribute set in it in the constructor. And then you define a typed array, and from the typed array, you read from the context the obtained style attributes. You give it the attributes which you get from the constructor, and then say the style name which you have given in the resource file for your style. And then you can change the orientation, for example, in that view, depending on the value which you have written there. You can also say you have a default value, so you don't have to define an attribute there. And the most important thing is you should recycle the typed array. In the documentations, they say there can happen strange things afterwards if you don't do it. Possibly you get out of memories or something else, but you should always recycle the typed array which you obtained from the context. And now again to the code. In the code, here you can see it again. We have defined different custom views, and in every custom view we have different definitions. And you can also see it on the right side. If I change, for example, the text, it gets automatically previewed in the layout editor. So you can make it really easy for you to develop a new layout. And because we can set the orientation through an attribute, we can also say here horizontally. With the auto-completion of Android Studio, you can see it immediately in the whole area. Let's look at the class. That's even a more easy thing. View, presentation mode, so you can see it better. There you have the custom view. You can define your custom array attribute with the 0 and 1. And then you have the constructors with the init method. So we use always the same whole setting. Then we can read with attributes. And that was the old one. No, init with attributes. There you can see we get the orientation through the type text array, also get the label and the value from the attribute, and can put it automatically into the views which we create in the create text view. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I have forgotten to sell it at first. And now we have the XML attributes. And now some best practice which we gained through our development of our new application. If you have already an application which is on the Play Store, or you have created it and is used by many users, you should at first remove all orientation fixations and the suppressing of the orientation change event from the system. Because if you don't do that, you have a lot of back analysis, because in some OS levels and devices, you have the full functionality. If you change the orientation, it gets relayouted completely, but in some devices it doesn't, and that's one of those problems. And if you start an application from the scratch, you should focus on the main classification for faster time to market. The main classification for you depends on the use case which you want to create. If you, for example, have a navigation app, normally you don't use a navigation app for a tablet. So the tablet shouldn't be your main classification which you start. It should be phone. But if you have a catalog with a lot of images, you should make a tablet version, because you say normally the guy is sitting in their living room, having the tablet on their knees and looking through the catalog. So that should be a tablet version for you, which you should create at first. But the other thing is you should always create an overall concept for your application for all classifications which you want to serve. Because so you, as a developer, can make a better modularization of your code. You can make better reuse of code. You can define better fragments, for example. So you see the main areas which are really correspond to another. The other thing is, if you support both orientations, save the instance state of your view on save instance state and read it again on the onCreate or on resume. Because that's makes your app more responsive, especially if you, for example, have an API where you get always a list of events and want to show it on one list view. If you always go to the API with the orientation change and read it again, the users hate you because it's not really responsive to the application. You can't see immediately what you have seen 1 second before. So you should save all things in this unsaved instance state. And one other thing is to make your objects parcelable. Don't use serialization. Because parcelable, it's a bit more work for the developer to do because you have to define every field which you want to write, but it's faster for reading and writing. And even the memory footprint is much smaller than serialization. Some developer hints for you more is you can start an activity for a result from a fragment as well. Previously, this was only available for activities, but you can do it as well for fragments. So you can go, makes the whole handling of the fragment in itself. If it starts an activity, for example, you say, my fragment has a login button and should go to the login activity and should come back and should tell me the result of this login. And all things happen in that one fragment. And if you want to register special servers, especially on create, a lot of frameworks or reportings which you made is normally on the create method. You always create a base class or base activity where you set all the lifecycle methods which you need and write it there. Since ICS, there's also the activity lifecycle callbacks in the application which you can use therefore. So you don't have to create a base activity for yourself. You just register the activity live callback and do it everything that you want in the application directly without extending the activity always. Another developer hint is if you, for example, see in the market or in any other error framework which you use a bad parcelable exception, and he said that you he didn't find the class which you want to parcel. That means normally you have a null pointer during the parcel process, or another exception. The whole parcel encapsulates the exception and doesn't throw it outside. And you can't see it even in the error frameworks. Another bad practice is the listener hell. How many of you use listeners for handling the information between the activities, fragments, or other things? 1, 2, 3, okay, some. That's really, in my opinion, an ugly solution, because you always have to set always the listener. You should remove it if you want to get an out of memory because of it. And there are a lot of better approaches at that. Two of them, for example, is the message bus from Otto, from Square, and event bus from Green Robot. That's really easy to use. You just register an observer, say, I want to listen for an event if somebody clicks at that list item. You define it, then later on, if the user clicks on it, you just send an event outside to the onClick method. And later on another class, you can handle the whole onClick event. So you don't have to write everywhere your listeners which you want to use. And if you use it really excessively, you have more than 20, 30, or 40 listeners in your application if it's really large. Then more about custom theme and style. Remember, Nuri created a page with Android UI utils. There are a lot of helpers to create launcher icons. There are some generators, also a simple generator for 9 patches. It's always worth looking there. He puts always new stuff in it, which you can use, and you should also show it to your designer. So you can make immediately everything there, and you get all the assets which you need for your development directly from the designer, and you don't have to say always, okay, there's missing 1 pixel for the 9 patch, or that's not the right small high-end width of this icon. And you can also, there's this action bar style generator. You can say, you give it the colors which you want for the action bar, for the tabs, and other stuff in this action bar. You can define it immediately. At the end, you get a zip file with the defined styles and the assets which you need. And the best thing of that is you can use different style compatibility. The first one is the default holo, which comes with Android Honeycomb. There's also action bar Sherlock compatibility. And I think 2 weeks ago, they announced the app combat, the action bar compatibility, where you can define immediately the stuff you need to use it in your application. It's just, like I said, a zip file, you just put it into a project, and it works immediately. There's also possibility for the whole color generator. You can define a base color of your application, which you normally use in the action bar. And then you can say, I want a custom edit text, a custom autocomplete text. There are a lot of flags which you can use. And then you get the assets with the styles, and you can again use it immediately in your application. That's also backward compatibility till I think it was Gingerbread and before, where you can say, define the whole theme. The whole application was only written with activities without any fragments. It was a real hassle for us to went over to fragments. We have to rewrite the complete application because of that, because the handling of fragments in regarding to activities really changed. And especially if the previous version of our application was fixed in portrait mode. And now we started to support both orientations. You can change immediately the device orientation and get a lot of problems with the parser level. Like I said, with the null pointer in it, and we didn't see it. And we even don't see it through our development parts. We only see it in the market that any user has this problem. We couldn't see it really. And such bugs to fix is really hard. So you should always use the developer console, the error area there, but there are normally only crashes. You should always also use another error framework like Hockey App, or what I can more say, Acra, but some guys don't like Acra because there are a lot more information which you have written, or Google Analytics. You can say, you can also send the custom business error messages there, so you can see it immediately in the live system. If a lot of users has that problem, you can, on the next version, you can fix that problem for the users, so it doesn't occur again. And because you normally don't have, like I said, about 3,600 devices at your work. Well, we have about 100 in the moment, but that's really a mess. You have to pay for them. You have to charge them always, because normally you forget it. And if you want to test, you have at first to recharge it for half an hour at least. And so you should take control of your application. Use in the place or in the developer console the stage rollout for your application. At first, the alpha and beta, if you have something like that, if you have beta users. But the most important thing is, like I said, the stage rollout. Say at first, 10% of my users should get the new application. So not everyone gets the error at first. So you can fix it immediately in 1 or 2 days, or even 1 or 2 hours, and resend a new version of that application. So your end user, the whole mess, gets always the best solution for them. And if you have worked with a designer, it's sometimes really hard for a developer. They only get a screen with all the measurements in pixel. Well, it's not really nice in Android, as I can say. So you should tell your designer to help you to make it fast, to create the whole development faster. Say it, you should use density-independent pixels in your layout. Have in mind that the whole screen is not fixed like in iOS. You have always areas where you can stretch. Takes the possibilities there. And don't make mistakes if the button is completely with a match parent of the whole screen. If you have a tablet and make in the landscape mode, the button is over the whole view. So we should also think about that. And so the designer should have this in mind. Then you should think of the states which you can have with a button or with another view. For example, pressed, focused. Well, focus is, for example, a state which is not really used nowadays. But it's really good if you want to make the application more accessible for blinds or for guys who don't see really good, so you can use a D-pad or a keyboard to navigate through your application. So you make the best of your application for the user. If you start from the beginning with, for example, with the state focused through your application, it's much easier for you to do it from the beginning if you do it in the end. And also, the focused in Google TV, you don't have any touch area. So if you want to also support Google TV, you should use Focusable as a state for your application.